Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video we are going to be taking a look at my build for Shadow of the Erdtree. This is one of the most versatile builds I've done. It has a ton of variety and it's also fun too. You'll be able to do a ton of different setups with the same exact stats, from the Burning Bandit, which is one of my favorite builds in Elden Ring, right around to doing big holy damage in case holy ends up being good for DLC. This is one of my favorite build videos I've done in a very long time because I love the versatility that this allows with Strength and Faith. Strength and Faith is some of the best builds in Elden Ring and also some of the most fun as well. This is an awesome setup to run. I figure the best way to test this would be to run through all the main game bosses and use a different setup, different build, different weapons for most of the main game bosses with the same exact stats that you can run here. This is the Hallowed Inferno and this is my DLC build. And of course, we're on New Game Plus 7 scaling. We're going to be jumping into Journey 35. We're going to start here with Lion's Claw to show off how much physical damage we can do with this build. Lion's Claw is great, and since we have around 40 strength, if we use the strength here, that'll get us to 50, which means two-handing Guts Greatsword will get you between 60 and 75 strength, allowing for a lot of pure physical damage with this setup. And of course, throughout all the different bosses, we'll be going over so many different weapons and things you could do with these exact same stats. The versatility of Strength and Faith feels, honestly, it feels pretty endless. We're going to have Bleed builds, we're going to have Holy builds, Fire builds, a lot going on here. And the damage we got from Lion's Claw is quite good. Right from the get-go here, right from the start, we're able to do a good amount of physical damage with Lion's Claw. You get some poise damage, by the way, too, but keep in mind, on New Game Plus 7, they have 30% more poise. Let's jump into equipment. And we have Guts Greatsword and Heavy Affinity with Lion's Claw. We have the Erdtree Seal. We're just using it for buffs. You can check out the armor set. Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Great Jar's Arsenal or the Arsenal Charm +2 for the weight. Ritual Shield Talisman, Strength tier, Green Burst Crystal tier. Next up is Spinning Strikes. So a cool addition to this is the fact that we could also run a Bleed build. We grab the Grave Scythe, put Bloodflame Blade on it, and in this case we're using Spinning Strikes. Later in the video we'll do Spinning Weapon as well, and this will allow us for a lot of Bleed build up. And of course this allows for a good amount of physical damage because the Grave Scythe is good in Heavy Affinity. Not only is it good in Heavy Affinity, it has 55 innate bleed, so when you add Bloodflame to it, which is 40 more bleed, you'll have around 95 bleed buildup. This allows for an amazing setup, and although I did get beat up for a second from Godric at the beginning, we do end up getting him back here as he's not able to get to phase 2 because when Spinning Strikes gets going, the amount of bleed buildup is actually insane. I actually like it better than Double Slash and a lot of the more popular options when you get this going. When you're able to start Spinning Strikes, keep it going, the amount of physical damage, successive attack damage, and bleed is insane. We have the Grave Scythe and Heavy Affinity with Spinning Strikes, any seal for buffs, the White Mask. Then we have the Shard of Alexander, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, or you can go with Ritual Swords Talisman if you only have one. Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Strength tier, we have the Thorny tier. Let's show the stats real quick. Now I'm going to go over the stats later again in the video as well as the best starting class. It's going to be the same stats for everything. It just depends whether we're using the Strength tier or Faith tier. Generally we have 50 Faith, 40 Strength. For a lot of them 60 Faith and 40 Strength, and for some of them 50 and 50. And next up is Wild Strikes, and yeah, it really just depends on whether we're using the Faith or Strength tier. For this build, we're going to use the Strength tier because, of course, we're doing primarily physical damage, pretty much all physical damage. We're in Heavy Affinity with Wild Strikes on the Rusted Anchor. This is an amazing build, by the way, against Ronin because he takes good pierce damage. This also works really well against dragons in the game, too, because they also take good pierce damage, and it builds up fast on successive attacks for massive damage. By the time you get like the third or fourth hit in, you're going to notice a substantial amount of damage, and if you can keep it going, if you can keep Wild Strikes on the Rusted Anchor going with the counter and pierce damage, it really does a lot. Later in the video, we're going to show off a whole bunch of different Strength and Faith stuff too. I wanted to show some of the physical damage stuff early on, the capabilities of this build, being able to switch from physical damage to fire damage to holy damage. There's so much you can do with the stats and general setup. This is easily my DLC build. We have the Heavy Rusted Anchor, of course, with Wild Strikes, any seal for buffs. You can check out the armor set, same armor set. Shard of Alexander, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Strength tier, and we also have the Thorny tier as well. If you only have one of Millicent's Prosthesis or Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, you can add a Defense Talisman, be a solid add there. Next up, we have Prayerful Strike, an awesome faith-based build that heals you and does massive poise damage. If you get bored with the Blasphemous Blade's Ash, this Ash is a little bit more challenging to use, and you'll get around the same amount of healing too, and of course you'll get more poise damage, and using something like the Great Stars is great for this build. Yeah, I know, Great Stars is great, but really, all seriousness here, the Great Stars will add in additional healing. I think it's around 2% per hit, so on top of what you get from Prayerful Strike, you get a little bit of additional healing from using the Great Stars, a solid addition to this build. Any of the bigger weapons in the game will do good poise damage, which makes them solid with Prayerful Strike. For this build, we have the Great Stars and Sacred Affinity with Prayerful Strike, we have the Erdtree Seal, and we have the Shard of Alexander. We have the Sacred Scorpion Charm, we have the Ritual Shield Talisman, we have the Ritual Swords Talisman because we're healing a lot. We have the Holy Tier, and of course the Faith Tier because we're in Sacred Affinity. And the next setup we have for you is the Flame Art Giant Crusher. Another one, since everything in this video you can do with the same exact identical stats. To keep in mind is the Giant Crusher, which in Flame Art scales with a C in Strength and a B in Faith. This is a very easy and simple build in which we're just using 2 buffs a tier, and we're using Royal Knight's Resolved with the Flame Art Giant Crusher, and we're able to get pretty good damage out of it, taking down Golden Shade, and I think a total of 3 hits. Yeah, he goes down really fast to a build like this one because we're able to get that 80% damage boost from Royal Knight's Resolve, and because the Flame Art Giant Crusher will give you over 950 AR. Solid setup overall. Let's jump into equipment. And we have the Flame Art Giant Crusher, we have Royal Knight's Resolve on it, any seal for buffs, same armor set here. We have the Axe Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Arsenal Charm +1, Ritual Swords Talisman, Flame Tier, Spike Crack Tier. A solid bonk option for the Hallowed Inferno build. Next up here, we have the Burning Bandit build, one of my favorite builds in Elden Ring, and an awesome way to do massive fire damage with jump attacks. So, to get both swords on fire, by the way, you have to two-hand the offhand one with Flaming Strike and then go back to the main hand one. So you two-hand and then you power stance and you're able to proc fire on both. And once you get fire on both, you can do massive damage with jump attacks. For a wholly damage option version of this build, check out my faith crafting builds on my channel. By the way, the faith crafting and everything else, my whole channel has been reorganized. I mentioned that in my past couple of videos. It's very easy to find stuff. Also, the Bandit curved swords get a B in Flame Art and Sacred, making them one of the best curved swords twin blade options you have for Sacred or Flame Art. For this, we have 2 Bandit curved swords in Flame Art Affinity with Flaming Strike. We have the Erdtree Seal. We have the Raptor's Black Feathers on for this build, hit 51 poise. And we have the Claw Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Ritual Swords Talisman, and then we have the Flame Tier and Thorny Tier as well, and you were using Margit's Shackle to stun the boss. And we're on to the Fire Giant to continue to show the versatility this build allows, to show the versatility the Hallowed Inferno build has, and allow us to do a little bit of lightning damage as well. We're going to be using Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike for this setup. One of my favorite incantations in the game is Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike because not only does it look cool, it does massive lightning damage, and it absolutely destroys some of the bigger targets in the game, and a lot of the Faith stuff really truly does look awesome. And even with 60 Faith, not bad there. 14,000 damage, not too bad. Just 2 buffs in the tier. Howl, by the way, is probably ran out by now, and we're still able to do massive damage. Super easy way to take down the Fire Giant. By the way, the Envoy's Longhorn, which we'll be showcasing later in the video, is also a solid option for the Fire Giant. I think he only has around 20% holy resistance, and it also destroys large targets, and it can posture break him too. And down goes the Fire Giant and his 64,000 HP on New Game +7. Doesn't have the most, Ricard has the most at 105,000. Second, we're going to go over equipment, everything you need to know. For this, we have the Gravelstone Seal and the Jellyfish Shield. You can check out the armor set, but it's pretty much the same there. Phlox Canvas Talisman, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Ritual Swords Talisman. And then for our tiers, we have the Lightning tier, and of course the Faith tier to get to 60 Faith. And next up was the Godskin Duo, a pretty formidable foe if you don't use Sleeping Pots. If you use Sleeping Pots, it makes life a lot easier. For this, we're using Spinning Weapon on the Grave Scythe, with of course using Bloodflame Blade as well to get that 95 bleed we talked about earlier. This is also an incredibly fun build too. I like Spinning Strikes better. You tend to get more physical damage, and once Spinning Strikes keeps going, it honestly just, it's incredible how much damage you can get out of it. This also has less range, as you got to be a little bit closer. But out of the two, which one's more fun in my opinion? I have more fun with Spinning Weapon. I think it's kind of been more enjoyable to use because it's kind of funny to just, I don't know, spin your weapon and do this and see how much bleed buildup you can get. Overall, those Spinning Strikes will net you more damage. Once again, here we're showing the versatility of a Strength and Faith build. There's so much you can do with this. I really enjoy Strength and Faith, and it's awesome being able to highlight this in this build video and to take these stats into DLC. We're going to continue to show more setups as we go along here. We're going to jump into equipment. We have the Heavy Grave Scythe. We're using Spinning Weapon, and we have Bloodflame Blade on it. We have any seal for buffs, White Mask. We have Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Thorny tier and the Strength tier for this build. That last one's super fun. By the way, a little bit of an error here. I had forgotten to record. This fight took me 2 tries. The second try, I forgot to hit the record button, so I only ended up with the end of this fight. However, this exact build for the Blasphemous Blade, this setup, same stats, of course, we're going to show off during the Godfrey fight. By the way, I record on Xbox, that's why I only got the final 30 seconds. I went to go check to see how long the clip was and how much I had recorded, and apparently I had recorded nothing. So either Xbox stopped recording or I had forgotten to hit record. Anyway, we're going to jump to the next build, which is the Sacred Blade build with the Watchdog's Greatsword. By the way, the Sacred Blade build is the same one you saw in the intro with the Giant Crusher. You'll get more AR out of the Giant Crusher, and of course it scales really well with Strength and Faith, but also keep in mind the Watchdog's Greatsword gets a B in Sacred and Flame Art, so that's pretty cool too. And now, in a second here, we're going to jump into equipment, everything you need to know. We have the Watchdog's Greatsword, of course in Sacred Affinity, we're using Sacred Blade. The Erdtree Seal would be good here. You could check out the armor set, but it's the same one we've been using. We have the Sacred Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Arsenal Charm +1 or Great Jar's Arsenal. We have the Ritual Swords Talisman, Holy tier, and of course the Faith tier. And next up here is the Blasphemous Blade build that we were going to show off before. We're going to take on Godfrey and Horaloo, of course using the Blasphemous Blade. You can throw in a couple fire incantations, which we have as well. We're going to go over some of those later in the video too, and a nice setup for them that you could do at 60 Faith. Overall, though, the Blasphemous Blade is great. Truly the definition of a great sword, the Blasphemous Blade heals you on the Ash of War and does massive fire damage. Now, am I going to take the Blasphemous Blade into DLC? I think it's going to be great for mobs. We're going to have some fire-resistant bosses, though, so I may lean more towards Holy if that ends up being good and physical damage. Which, again, you could do all of this with identical stats, so we have a lot of variety. That's why I'm going to take this build into DLC. A lot of people might like taking their Bleed builds into DLC, but for me, Bleed builds aren't as fun. I think Strength and Faith is the perfect blend of fun and power. I thought about Faith and Dexterity, because I enjoy Dexterity a lot too. Dexterity is some of the most fun builds that I've done, but the Faith Dex options aren't as great, and you don't get the two-handed bonus that you get with Strength, which makes Strength and Faith a better option at rune level 150. Because you got to think it away, every time you two-hand, you're kind of getting that extra bonus, which is like 20 levels in this case. If we have 40 strength, we end up with 60. If we use the strength tier, we end up with 75 strength when we two-hand our weapon. I felt like this was a really versatile option to take on DLC, where I feel confident enough in the amount that I can do to have so much variety that I'll be able to take on the majority of bosses, power up along the way with the new combat system, and take on DLC. By the way, hyper buffing and stuff, I think that's going to be different for DLC. With the new combat system, having to power up along the way, I think buffs are actually going to impact us less. I mean, don't quote me on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if all of our buffs do less for DLC. Which is great for this build because you could always go back to Lion's Claw, reliable, two-handed, get a lot of damage on the charge attacks and the poise damage and everything. As long as posture is similar, Lion's Claw is going to be an awesome build and setup to take in, which you could do with this build as well, or this setup rather. Let's jump into equipment. Yeah, once again, I know some people are going to use this timestamp. Same stats for everything. We have the Blasphemous Blade, Giant Seal. You can check out the armor set there. Fire Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, throw in our incantations, Ritual Swords Talisman, Flame tier, Faith tier. And lastly is a bit of a combination build. We're going to be using Blasphemous Blade and Pest Threads for the final boss just to show how easy Radagon is. Elden Beast does go on for a little bit, so we're going to talk about a couple different things during the Elden Beast fight, but overall this is an easy way to take both of them down. Especially Radagon. Radagon's so easy with the Blasphemous Blade. You can pretty much walk in there, use the Ash of War, do whatever you gotta do, and most of the time the fight only lasts about, 45 seconds or so. It's relatively quick. And yeah, this is just an easy option. Does it take a little bit of time with Elden Beast? Yeah, it ends up being probably like a 3-minute and change fight, but overall this fight took 2 tries in total, and the first try was actually a mistake that I'll explain here in a second, so really it only took 1. So after all this time, you think I would know the stats on the Blasphemous Blade, that you need 15 dexterity. For some reason I thought it was 14. I ended up having to waste the larval tier. I went into the fight not even paying attention whatsoever and could not use the Blasphemous Blade. Yeah, larval tiers are far and few between when you do a lot of builds like I do, so for me to have to go waste one for 1 point was a little bit frustrating to say the least, but it is what it is. I came back into the fight and on the second try was able to get them both. Even though it took a while, the Blasphemous Blade will keep you alive. By the way, I want to mention real quick, if you're not subbed yet, definitely be sure to sub to this channel. You're not going to want to miss out when DLC comes around for Elden Ring. Later in the year, we're going to cover some other games too, including Black Myth Wukong on the main channel, because of course it's a Souls-like. This community has been amazing, and you don't want to miss out. Yeah, this community has been absolutely amazing. I love Elden Ring. It's the best game I've ever played, no question about that. I'm going to continue to cover Elden Ring, but obviously some games, other games later this year. I'm looking forward to Black Myth Wukong. I think that's going to be good too. Yeah, I think that's going to be a solid game. I don't think anything's going to touch Elden Ring in the next couple of years. I know that's disappointing to say. Hopefully From Software has something else in the works, something really good that they're working on. They got to be working on something. I'm not sure what it is, but whatever it is, I imagine it's going to be quite good too. I'm also on my alternate channel, going to start branching out to other games. I'm going to do an early game guide for Dark Souls soon, that got voted on, and I'm also going to do my favorite locations in Elden Ring too. I saw that also got a lot of votes for second, so I'm going to do that one as well, ranking my top 10 locations in the game. Last thing to say here, by the way, is that in the description below is how to get the Shard of Alexander, how to get the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, and of course a talisman guide that shows you how to get pretty much all the good attack talismans in the game if you need that, so you can make any of these setups. And that was pretty much all of my notes for this video. Later in this video, by the way, it's not over yet, we're going to take on some side bosses, and we're going to use a couple of different cool setups. There was a bunch of stuff that got cut, by the way, that ended up getting cut, because there's so much you can do with Strength and Faith. Yeah, the amount of variety that we have with a build and setup like this ended up even surprising me. I never ran these exact stats before, I don't think, and having the alternate between the Strength and Faith tier, it gives you so many options. When you're two-handing Strength stuff, you get a lot of damage, and of course you can get a lot of damage out of the Faith stuff, and then combine it for some awesome Strength and Faith builds. Yeah, you have weapons like the Giant Crusher, Brick Hammer, a whole bunch of different weapons that scale with Faith and Strength, so you can add those to Sacred, Flame Art, whatever you need. The crafting videos, by the way, for Faith, I'll put them in the description below too. I mentioned this earlier, but the Blasphemous Blade truly does keep you alive. Now, it's only going to do between like 1500 and 2000 damage, depending on whether or not you have buffs. Pretty much everything probably ran out by now, but it's reliable and it does allow you to survive this fight. Yeah, this is basically a stamina check for most people. Now, a New Game Plus 70 has 31,000 something HP, and he has pretty good resistances. 40% against all elements except Holy, which he has 80% resistance to. Takes good physical damage, though. Now, with that said, given his physical resistances are 10, his elemental is mostly 40 besides Holy, he's pretty much not weak to anything. Now, Pest threads, if you use Hellish Rebiri and the Jellyfish Shield, will do a lot of damage. That is a good option for you, and you can run it with a build like this. So keep that in mind. I kept going back to the Blasphemous Blade, though, to keep healing myself and to basically survive the fight. You know, the whole stamina check of Elden Beast, Blasphemous Blade is good at doing that. It's keeping you alive, and yeah, the fight's a little bit longer, but overall you'll be able to survive it and get through the fight. As many people know, it's no secret that this is not my favorite boss in the game. I'm not a huge Elden Beast fan. I like Radagon a lot. I think it's a cool fight. As far as Elden Beast and the whole stamina check thing goes, I understand it's supposed to test you completely, but I'm not a huge fan of the fight or boss. In a second here, though, he's going to go down, then we're going to show off the build, everything you need to know. Later in the video, we'll go over stats, and we have a couple more setups to show you, a lot of versatility. As I mentioned, I did cut out some stuff, but overall, there's a lot you could do with this setup. So what these stats allow: holy damage, lightning damage, fire damage, a lot of elemental versatility there. The only thing you really don't have is magic damage, and then of course a lot of physical damage too, which is usually always reliable. One thing I've learned about Elden Ring as a whole is you can't really go wrong with physical damage. If you switch to something like Lion's Claw, I'm sure it's going to be just as reliable and just as good for DLC. Elden Beast finally went down after a 3-minute and change fight. We were able to take him down and survive with the Blasphemous Blade. By the way, if you're wondering why I was offline, I got kicked off Xbox Live. I was having a little bit of trouble with Xbox Live this week, so I ended up going offline. We have the Blasphemous Blade here. We have the Claw Mark Seal. You can check out the armor set there. We have the Shard of Alexander, Fire Scorpion Charm, Phlox Canvas Talisman. We have the Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Flame tier, and of course the Faith tier, a very reliable build. And next up here, we're going to talk about Maliketh's Black Blade. So this is a really cool weapon, and another one that you could do holy and percentage damage, by the way, with this weapon, with these identical stats. And of course, it does hit really hard. This could be a solid weapon for DLC. It's a big weapon. It's a colossal weapon, so it's going to weigh a lot. You're going to need the Arsenal Charm with these stats, but overall, you're going to get a good amount of damage out of it. This is a weapon I don't cover a lot because when I go high faith, like higher faith in Elden Ring, say 80 or so, or 60 or above in this case, usually a lot of times I'll use the Black Knife because it's light and you get the percentage damage and the range, but this weapon can destroy some of the bigger bosses with ease, especially since it hits a lot. Of course, because it is a heavier weapon, as you can see with the hits to the head there, though dragons take additional damage to the head, it does a lot of damage on regular hits too, and we're getting a good AR with solid strength and faith investment. Another awesome weapon, by the way, I think I mentioned it on screen, it may have came up at the bottom, a lot of things did throughout the video, is Ardovas' Greatsword is awesome too as a strength and faith weapon you can run with identical stats. Let's jump into equipment here for the Maliketh's Black Blade build. And for equipment, we have Maliketh's Black Blade plus 10, we had the Erdtree Seal, check out the armor set, but it's pretty much the same, hit 51 points, Shard of Alexander, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Arsenal Charm plus 1 or Great Jar's Arsenal, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. And next up here we have the Flame Art Iron Greatsword. I had to throw this one in because it's absolutely awesome. The Iron Greatsword gets amazing base damage, and in Flame Art with Flaming Strike you'll get around 930 AR. That applies to the same thing, by the way, if you end up using Sacred Blade, you can get a ton of holy damage with this weapon. The Iron Greatsword's base damage across the board is amazing. It's also awesome in Blood Affinity if you're looking for a bleed build. Overall, the base damage makes this weapon incredible. Yeah, much like the Guardian Swordspear, which is kind of the Dex version of this in terms of base damage, the Iron Greatsword's base damage will pretty much carry any of your builds, whether that's Poison Affinity, Blood Affinity, or Flame Art, Sacred, etc. You're going to get a lot of damage out of it. Let's jump into equipment and everything you need to know. For equipment, we have the Flame Art Iron Greatsword with Flaming Strike. We have the Erdtree Seal, same armor set, you can check it out there. Fire Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Shield Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Flame Tier, and of course the Faith Tier as well. A lot of damage out of this build. The Iron Greatsword's awesome. And next one up here, of course, we have the Envoy's Longhorn. We're able to use the bubble build to full effect with these exact stats because we're a Strength and Faith build, and we can do a ton of damage with bubbles, and even in this case, destroy the big dragon on New Game Plus 7. Anybody that knows my channel knows that I was definitely going to include the bubble build, the Envoy's Longhorn, in this video because there's nothing more fun than destroying some of the toughest bosses in the game with bubbles, which for some reason also do poise damage. As much as Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike can be fun for some of the bigger targets in the game, I actually enjoy using the Envoy's Longhorn more, and of course it's a little bit easier to use too because you don't have to charge it, you could just use the Astral War really quickly, and then you get that additional posture damage too. And you're going to see the big dragon here, Placidusax or Placidusa, however you say it. I always say the name wrong. He ends up getting destroyed by it. He does manage to phase this time. Usually I can get him to not phase. However, when phase 2 comes around, we end up getting a poise break and doing so much damage to him. If you're ever struggling with this boss, even your first playthrough, just grab this weapon. You can get this weapon in the capital by the East Rampart side of Grace, the medium envoy enemies. You could also get it out in the Hallowed tree. This is definitely worth grabbing and adding to your faith build and your arsenal for massive holy damage. A lot of people have told me they haven't tried or messed around with this weapon yet. It is really quite good. It's better than you think it would be, and go around the game and find any of the dragons in the game and use this against them, and it's just going to be a really quick, very, very short fight with the Envoy's Longhorn. Alright, in a second here, we're going to go over equipment. By the way, the stats are on the side for each one, although the next clip I'll go over the stats for the entire build and talk about them a little bit in the final clip of the video. That'll be the next one where we'll talk about Burn of Flame. Let's jump into equipment here. And we have the Envoy's Longhorn plus 10. We're using the Erdtree Seal. We have the Envoy's Crown on. That'll boost it by 15%. We have the Shard of Alexander, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Ritual Shield Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Holy Tier, Faith Tier, of course, for this awesome build. And next up is the final setup, and I'm going to show the buffing order for most of these too. You're going to drink your tier first, then you're going to cast Golden Vow, because you want to go from longest duration to shortest, and then lastly you're going to either use Hellish Brewery or Flame Grant Me Strength, whichever one's better for that build, because they're the shortest duration. And keep in mind, the only time Flame Grant Me Strength will beat Hellish Brewery, unless you're worried about the additional damage that you get with Hal, is if you're doing both fire and physical damage, then Flame Grant Me Strength is better. And now we're going to have a complete fire build. We're using 2 giant seals here, but you could use one on the jellyfish shield. It's about 2 to 4% more if you have 2 of the seals, and we're going to be using Flame Fall upon them, Giant's Flame Take Thee, and Burn of Flame. Now, towards the end of this video, I just got really excited for DLC. I've been excited for DLC, but it feels like these last 2 months are the longest. Maybe it's just me. It feels like they're the longest 2 months that we've been waiting, and we waited 2 years at this point. But now that I've actually came up with a build I want to use for DLC, I can't wait to try it out. I honestly cannot wait to use the versatility that this build has and to run Strength and Faith for DLC and for Shadow of the Erdtree. It's going to be a phenomenal DLC for Elden Ring. Best game I've ever played. Let's hope it's also the best DLC we've ever played. Right now, for me, that's the Ring City. Can't wait to do that early game guide for Dark Souls 3 too. I'm going to do that within the next week or 2 as well. That should be a lot of fun. But overall, Elden Ring is definitely my favorite game. Can't wait for Shadow of the Erdtree. It's going to be awesome. For equipment, we have 2 giant seals. We hit 51 poise. You can check out the armor set there. We have the Godfrey icon because we're using chargeable incantations. Fire Scorpion Charm, Flux Canvas Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Flame Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about the stats finally. And for the stats, as far as this build goes, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 25 Endurance, 40 Strength, but we're getting to 60 when we're two-handing it. We have 50 Faith, but 60 Faith with the Faith tier. Now, if we flip that and use the Strength tier, we end up with 50 for both. And the best possible starting class if you want to run this build for DLC and you're just starting out is the Confessor, no question about it. You're going to have some faith, you're going to have a little bit of dexterity that you're going to need for a lot of the weapons, and a little bit of strength as well. It's the perfect starting class. And thanks for watching this one. I appreciate everybody that tuned into this video. By the way, if you're going to end up using this build or whatever build you're using for DLC, be sure to comment that below. I'm going to be taking these stats into DLC because honestly, I love strength and faith. It's versatile and it's incredibly fun. By the way, I hope this video came out well, at least recording-wise. I had a root canal Wednesday, so I was still dealing with some tooth pain and whatnot, had to take some breaks, but overall, this video was awesome. It was awesome doing this build. I can't wait to take it into DLC. Be sure to sub and catch you soon.